All right. Good evening. Buenas noches a todos y todas. Good evening to everyone watching, everyone tuning in, and to those that will tune in eventually that won't get to hear this wonderful, pleasant introduction. So, welcome once again to Tertuliando en Cuarentena, which is basically gathering in quarantine. It is intentional, accidental, and accidental intentional space that comes forth out of the intent of wanting to do something in the midst of literally being in quarantine 5 months ago. And this came about conversations, honest conversations, a place where it's safe to be vulnerable, a place where it's safe to exchange, no hidden agendas. We exchange freely, and there's a multiple plural array of people that have come by here, and I'm super honored that tonight we're gonna have an exceptional conversation, which is quite regular here, so it's quite the norm. But I don't lose the excitement. I think it's perfection. So tonight, joining us all the way from Australia, uh, we've had quite a consecutive amount of guests that have been from Australia. I have a special place in my heart for Australia. So without any further ado, I don't want to lengthen this introduction more than it needs to be. So we have Tanya Levin joining us from Sydney. Is she in Sydney? Maybe not, but she'll be able to clear it out if she's not.
Yes,
Bienvenida. Yes, you're in Sydney.
yes. Good morning. It's a beautiful,
I am
beautiful day out there.
geographically. Yes. Good morning to you. Good evening to everyone on this side. It's so cool when it's international like that. We can make it like dual greetings.
Yeah, love it. Love it, love
Morning
it, love it.
greeting,
We've talked about
dinner,
that.
breakfast.
Right. I can already tell you, like, Saturday is going to be a great day.
You're in Saturday. I am in Friday.
Way into Saturday. Um,
Keeps on getting better. Gracias. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us in this space.
no, thank you so
Um,
much for organizing this. I
I
need
think
you to tell me, so you tell everybody how to pronounce your name. I've been thinking what Australians must have done to your name when you were
no.
here.
Well, it goes.
Angel?
See,
Angel.
Angel is fine or Angel is fine. Whichever comes out
Okay.
is okay. Is
But
okay.
Australians would have mangled that, wouldn't they?
I Angel, maybe a little bit Angel.
Angel.
But I mean, we're talking about what was it, 13, 14, 15 years ago. So
Okay.
I think I didn't pay much mind to it if they butcher my name or not. Maybe if I want to be a bit of an asshole right now, I could maybe give people a bit of a hard time. But I'm not going to do that with you.
I know. They do it with everyone. It's fine. It's fine.
So gracias
Just trying to
again.
see, yeah, if the lighting is.
No,
I
the
guess
lighting
we'll
is
leave it like
fine.
that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
That's fine. That's fine. So, something we'd like to do here is start things off talking about the current setting, the current context in this
Uh-huh.
times of pandemia, in times of quarantine, which hence the name of this space. So, it's a three-part question. So, back in March, February, when this whole thing started, what was your routine? What things were you doing? What things maybe were finding you busy? And second part of the question, then how does this impact that? And how have these 5 months have been like for you? And the last part of the question,
Mhm.
maybe your observations as to what things have come up in society as a consequence of this pandemia. So first, what were you doing before this?
Well,
Two,
yeah.
how did it impact that, and how has it been these past 5 months? And then three, maybe your observations as to what things you have noticed as this has kind of brought forth in society.
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate. I didn't have too much of a disruption. I had just finished a job before it all kind of hit. And, you know, I'm finding that all of the Gen Xers are really not complaining about having to stay home. We're quite, we're at that age, we're kind of homebodies anyway. So it didn't really, disrupt us too much. A lot of us are like, no, it's fine. We'll just stay home. Kind of staying home anyway. Observations is like, I guess I guess what really speaks to me is, and I don't know if I'm missing something, are we really not that resilient? The last big war, the last biggest kind of thing to hit the world, if it were World War II, I'll never forget. And I know you can't make complete comparisons because suffering is suffering. So I've always said, if I've got no legs, but somebody kicks you in the shins, your shins still hurt,
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. But I remember my best friend's grandfather was a grave digger in a concentration camp for 5 years, right? And he went on to, live the rest of his life. And comparatively, it's not so tough to stay home and be socially distant. But, I'm not 21 years old, and I've got really strong networks and used to spending a lot more time on my own. So I don't know what that's like to be a young person. It's really sad for that entire generation that were just about to burst out into the world and make it their own, and they've been told they can't. And there definitely are all these impacts, but I have struggled a little bit to understand some of them, but they're obviously real. They're obviously really affecting people. And as it goes on, sorry, I could tell you so many things all day. As it goes on,
you're good. Keep on going.
It's I can see how it's really dragging people. So, for instance, we've had a terrible outbreak in Victoria, where Melbourne is, that hasn't seemed to have affected the rest of the country. It's really stayed in that state, and they had to go into a pretty severe second lockdown. And in a way, it's like the novelty wore off. So the first time you go in, everybody wants to do the right thing and address the issue, but I don't know how you continue motivating people when it's like, all right, we're just going to do this again for 6 weeks and hope hope you don't have to do it again in 2 months' time. So it is, I can see it's really depressing people. And
And I think that could speak a little bit into, like, as far as, when we're talking about society, you're talking about also, since this is affecting people at such a large scale, how have governments been handling it? And that's a huge deal as to how it's going to affect people.
I've watched so many different methods in this country. Our prime minister really just said, hey, everybody, do the right thing. And I thought that was quite silly, but it seems to have done quite a good job. Being really authoritarian hasn't worked out in areas. So, the responses have been so interesting. And I don't know what you guys are finding, but there's a lot of expectations now, but there's not the other side. So I don't understand why workplaces haven't all kind of adopted this universal approach, but I don't know.
Well, it's definitely brought up, as far you mentioned workplaces. I mean, there's some, it's brought attention to some jobs that could perfectly well be done from home, and they are maybe at such a retrograde, archaic perspective that they force people to go to this physical environment when they don't really need to. And now it's brought up the fact that some things could be very much be done from home.
Yeah, and I think absolutely people need human contact, and for creativity and those kind of processes, you can't always predict them, and that you need a lot of energy and spontaneous kind of stuff. But oh man, I'm really wondering how many people are going to want to get up and do a commute and sit around all day. But I think it's going to be a great thing. Yeah, don't you think?
Man, like in this time, like, for example, as I've been here in my, like, it's been a year and a few months since I left Germany, and I've been here in the US. It's the longest run of me living in the US since maybe a decade ago, when I lived in New York for a year but now I'm living, I'm living the Texas experience, which is like a whole different country.
Wow.
Um, for what it's worth, which is usually pretty bad.
Wow.
And so I mean there's a lot of privilege that I'm in. I've been here last year with my folks, so there's that privilege. I've had a job until I didn't have a
Yeah.
job anymore.
Yeah.
So there's some privilege that goes into that. So as as I come into commenting or making societal commentaries, I try to observe what is beyond my arm's length, because there's many people that are not in my current circumstance, and they're like actually living day to day. I mean,
Yeah.
some commentaries that arose, for example, back home in Puerto Rico, is some people I know commenting on some families that were uh, week to week going to the grocery store to buy, and they're like, why can't they just stay home? And I'm thinking, because they live week to week, because they can't do the whole going and do a
Yeah.
monthly shop. They can't do it.
Yeah.
So
They.
it's good to have that in perspective before we open our mouths and start condemning people that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's. Yeah, and it's what else is really coming up. I mean, I don't know how much contact you're having with this, but there just seems to be so much of the conspiracy theory stuff.
Mm,
I don't think I have had a chance to tell you while we've been talking before. I've started, like, we're getting a lot of it. So the numbers at the moment are, if a vaccine turned up in Australia tomorrow, only 60% of people would be consider taking it. There's so much kind of paranoia,
oh
and
yeah.
which is interesting because they say herd immunity is about 60%. So I don't know, maybe nature and evolution and science are all in cahoots.
Have oil working synchronicity.
Yeah, but so there's all of that stuff coming up, and it seems to me like another kind of religion, like another cult. I've got a friend that's messaging every day with all kinds of theories and Bill Gates and vaccines and this, that. And it sounds again like these people think they've got something exciting, something new. They've got the truth, and they don't care what other people think because they've got the truth. And there's a lot of community in that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very tribal, and so it's not an intellectual thing that they're
No, no.
believing, all these kinds of theories. It's an emotional thing.
There's an emotional connection. Of course, you're creating community, and you have an urgent message to share.
Yes. And
S-
there's no point in rationalizing with people any more than it would be with a religious person. And yeah, again, I was thinking some of these things they say are so outlandish. They could be considered to have psychiatric issues, but they're only saying things that are as outlandish as any other religious leader. Kind of unscientific beliefs that.
But the thing is, Tanya, I think there's going to come a point when some of these things have to be pathologized. Like some of these things, because you see the consequences, you see what they lead to, and you see, and you have. I think there's plenty of material to patternize, to make a ground of study that could be treated pathologically.
Well, in my state, so very basic mental health legislation in my state. If you're a danger to somebody else, a danger to somebody else, a danger to yourself, or a danger to your reputation. So if you are unwell psychiatrically and you're running down the street telling everyone you're Arnold Schwarzenegger and you're Rambo, right? So they can detain you involuntarily in a psych hospital. And yeah, sorry, these are just the the ravings of my mind on.
And we see it's a great
right?
example. It's a great example, and I think it's it's clearly worthy of discussion because it's still happening. Something I like to do in this space, and as we start the conversation, is to get to know a little bit about you.
Oh yeah, that first, I guess, before we kind of
no,
dig into these things.
It's through this question. I like to ask my guests to share what they feel are three experiences of through experiences of cathartic moments, through experiences of transformation that you feel have taken place in your life, whether you recognize them in hindsight or you recognize them as you're going through these things. It could be instances, like specific moments. It could be like processes, seasons. But if you can point to three moments in your life that you feel were were memorable enough that now you recognize their importance in your life. Like if this wouldn't happened, maybe I wouldn't be here. So it's like three experiences that make the Tanya Levin that we have here before us.
Oh man. Well, there's quite a few. Um, um, even in terms of this current pandemic, it does remind me of the HIV outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, I'm just talking to you off the top of my head, but because we're going to talk about spirituality and religious experiences and stuff. But I guess I remember all of that outbreak and the way people were treated in the day, in the late 80s and the early 90s, and how the church treated them. And I guess that had quite an effect on me in terms of, beginning to question, I guess, church's authority and, truth and, what's worth what. I'm not really leading to a specific experience, I guess, in relation to that directly, I guess, was having had all those questions for all those years and then finding out the day that I found out the church that I had been brought up in, was founded by a pedophile, which had been not very clearly expressed on the stage by the pastor who was running the church. But that was kind of one of those moments where you go, okay, so it's not actually me that's crazy, it's these guys. And that, that was a bit of a turning point. Man, I'm learning every day. You want 3? You're talking to somebody who cried through Lassie Come Home even after Lassie came home, right? So like everything's cathartic for me, right?
You can use that as one if you want.
We'll get back to it. Let me think, because
it could be
three.
It could be. There's no the 3, of course.
The
and whatever you say, it's whatever you say. So it's not like there's gonna be some challenge in the crowd. So like that's not one. You gotta give another one.
Yeah, mine are gonna be weird. They're not gonna be standard.
Because I'm having a talk here with Tanya Levin. I'm not having a talk with anyone else. So you give your experiences. So there's no contrast, none of that bullshit.
It's funny, isn't it? And so there's these like major days that you spoke, like I should say to the day I had my son, that totally changed my life. But did it change my life as much as 20 years later when he tells me how he talks about me to people and how much he's like, every time I drink, I start talking about you and I just love you. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, wow. It's kind of,
like beautiful
things. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Angel. I get a lot of brain energy in the morning.
It's good. It's good. You can share a little bit of that with us.
It's a little bit all over the place.
It's okay. It's
I'll
okay.
keep thinking.
It's okay. So maybe I can ask you in regards to, like you've been a part of basically during a great part of your life, and I would say during formative parts of your life, being a teenager in a church that's kind of like that's about to spurt such growth, nationally speaking, and eventually become internationally renowned, a church like Hillsong. So I'm sure there were moments as I read part of your book, there are moments in there that were significant in your life, and we don't have to pick out three moments, but we can just engage in a conversation here, and
Okay.
I find it really, I, for example, that was a part of this church for only a year and a half of my life. I mean, it definitely left a lasting impression in me.
Yeah, for sure.
D-
It
it
does
does
that.
that.
I mean, it does, and yet to some people it doesn't at all. Um, there's a married couple that I mean, they've been married a long time now. They're a little bit younger than me, but she left. She was like, "Huh, you know what? I don't really agree with this. I don't want to go anymore." It was no big deal, and her
Yeah.
father was actually a leader, and
Wow.
it didn't bother her. Her husband spent years like walking and listening and trying to process it all, and so it's
Yeah. Each one is his own world.
and I mean, I'm reading a book on Scientology at the moment, and Australia actually had a lot more to do with it and its growth than
Yeah.
people realize. And so many people just said how much it helped them and changed their lives and made their lives better. So it's just all so interesting, right?
No, and I think that that's the thing to make out, like wide, uh huge generalized blanket statements that you're just gonna like just throw everyone into the fold, like everyone is just like one homogenous organism. I think that's a huge betrayal to everyone's journey. And I
Yeah.
think and I think this is a problem within mainline churches, that it is a call to homogenize, like to funnelize experiences, and there's so much formula that goes into it, like one, two, three, here you go. And
Yeah.
for example, I was talking to my dad earlier about my experiences when I was in New York, when I left Australia 2006. A few years I found myself in New York, and they were starting the Hillsong chapter in New York. So at that time, I went with a friend of mine that still had some relationship with it. I mean, at that point, I was, even when I left Australia, I had deconstructed so much of it. I didn't have any real relationship, or any desire to be in that sort of charismatic type of Christian circle. I was still a Christian, but I wanted to be more critical, have a critical theology, and that was not there. So I went with my friend. That was at a time when they were just meeting at an apartment. That was when I mean, what is the pastor's name? God, I just totally forgot his name right now. From the main,
Houston. I'm sorry,
no,
Brian
from the main,
Houston.
from the main, no, no, from the New York campus.
Oh, Carl Lentz. Can you explain to me
Carlins.
though? Can you please
Carlins.
help me with why New York City would embrace Hillsong? Because I literally don't understand. It's
Um, I'll have my theories.
all
Let me finish a little bit of my story.
right.
When
Sorry.
I when I when I went to, it was no Hillsong church. It was just a meeting in an apartment, like a cell group. And man, they went full on blown out tongue speaking, like within like
Oh,
a few
really?
mi- a few minutes. And
Wow.
and that's something I experienced also in Australia, but not during the main services.
Yeah.
Not during the main services, because I think the main services have been sanitized
Of
and
course.
mainstreamed. So those things could turn some people a little bit. But I want to hear a little bit about your experience, because you were there pre Hillsong. You were there pre
Yeah.
big mega international church.
Yeah. I mean, my progression was that my parents very quickly. My mother is Jewish. My father came out from England. Met my mother in South Africa. They both converted to a very kind of Episcopalian kind of Christianity, and then wanted more on their own journey. So the
Mm.
story goes, and joined a small Pentecostal church close to us. And then so I was baptized in water and speaking in tongues from 8 years old. That was our normal. And when we moved, complete, coincidence that we went to the next local church that was closest to us, which was Hills Christian Life Center, which is the church that became Hillsong. And it was a very, I guess there were like 300 people then, which was about 1985. In a warehouse, very friendly, and there was a lot of, nerdy dancing and singing and jumping and fun times, but yeah, very much more emphasis on exorcisms and the spiritual. And I mean, the 80s was full of all of that kind of demons everywhere anyway. But it was common. And then as time moved on, they definitely became more marketable. And then it evolves into what they call, you would know, seeker sensitive, which means they want to kind of be sensitive to the new people coming in, which is, I think, kind of contradictory to the Bible from what I remember. But anyway, so it's now really
they make
a one-way event.
They make things a bit more palatable.
Seeker sensitive, and it's so now it's almost a one-way event, from what I understand too. So.
But I want to go back to perhaps
almost no interaction.
What if in your experiences there, when you started going, what things, what were some things that attracted you to it, like as you I guess maybe as you found yourself there, because I guess your parents started going there, but how did you maybe make peace with it? Like what were things that maybe helped you make peace with it?
It's funny. No, I up until I started kind of falling apart, I really loved it. It was very genuine. Hey, back in the time, it was just like very genuine, and our pastors were working during the week and doing this extra stuff on weekends. And it was literally the old kind of like, give these guys $5 because they're taking on all this extra work and they've got kids to feed. And I'd been brought up in a strong Christian home, and there were some really nice people there. Some of them are still there. Very nice people. And it's interesting, I think, when you're like 15, 16 and you see like other really open Christian kids. Because it's a pretty brave thing at high school. And I really admired them, and I don't know how to, I'm trying to avoid corny words, but it was wholesome and it was nice and it was supportive and it was community and it was very real. These were just a bunch of real people. They did still have some big ambitions, but they weren't the focus. One day we're going to tell the world how great God is. But you didn't think at the time, like, on multiple screens. Was, and I've always been, socially minded and, wanting to flip tables and stuff. So that kind of stuff really appealed to me, to be honest. Yeah.
I want to share a part of your book, and I figure since it's written out to the world, I can share.
Of course. I just don't remember all of it. So
no, claro. So me sharing it maybe remind you, it's a part of the book that you share from your diary. And I shared it before we went on air. Because I just yesterday, my talk yesterday with the singer-songwriter from Puerto Rico, he was sharing about how Bruce Springsteen was such a huge influence. I mean, it literally embarked him on his career, and it changed his life. Specifically, the song "Thunder Road." So, and I want to share you input here, January 4th, 1987. On a Sunday, and you're right. This is the day I was freed from the spirit of rock and roll. I started up a conversation with John O.D., who DJs at 2Day FM, and he told me he despises the music. He told me the worst person Satan has anointed is Bruce Springsteen. I told him he was telling the wrong person. He disagreed. We talked. We talked. Rock and roll is all about fornication, especially dancing in the dark. It hit so hard. He told me to pray when I got home. Then he offered to pray for me. He released me from the spirit of rock and roll and seduction, and I cried. He told me God loves me and has so much for me. I came home, and for an hour and a half, I sat in the dark crying, taking down posters, breaking records, destroying tapes, and giving rock music up. I can't believe I'm saying this. I will be free, but I'm gonna miss my Bruce, and I'm dying to hear Thunder Road.
Oh, Bruce, I'm here, honey. If you're listening, Bruce, I only left you for a little while.
I read that and it made me feel so pained. It made me feel so sad, and it made me feel of how many people go through this, and people should have to go through this.
And I mean, without identifying anybody, that guy that told me all that stuff is a lot more problematic and complex than I realized when I was sort of 15 or 16. But yeah, and you know, when you're a kid and you get your music and that's all you got, and you know, whoever understands you and you can go be with your music. I couldn't do that anymore. Funnily enough, I'm just remembering it was actually Madonna's Cherish that brought me back. So it was that, you know, that really simple beat, and that came out in like 1989. So that would have been two or 3 years later, and it was, so what I think is that their own kind of hypnotic, the church's own hypnotic music programming, you know, from all those catchy songs, I still have a real need for it. And that's what kind of, I couldn't live without. By the time I heard Cherish, I was like, nah, this is great. What is wrong with that song? That's not evil. It's not satanic. It's, you know,
I listened to it for the first time yesterday
Cherish
because of
Thunder Road.
Thunder Road, because of my friend mentioned it, and I'm like, I got to listen to the song, and it's such a great song. It's just a story.
Oh yeah, and all of his kind of, you know, longings. He was like 26 when he wrote that, and
Bruce.
yeah, he was just so prolific, and yeah, there's so much in that.
How, you know,
Wow.
how you know, you were just 15, I believe, when you were going through this. I mean, if you can remember, I mean, and I read some other posts that you were really trying to please God, like you were legitimately trying to please God, and then in further entries in your diary, you continually said how much you missed that song, like you were legitimately fasting from that song.
Yeah. I mean, I was a weird kid anyway. I was no kind of cheerleader, so I like to, and you know.
But this is quite normal, though. I mean, this experience is very. I mean, I remember when I had my music that I thought was of the devil, and da 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 da, and I want to please God, and da da da, and then you hear that over and over so many times. I mean, this wasn't a pastor telling you this, but this is what they hear. This is what they hear.
And I, you know, I've got to wonder how. I mean, if that guy, I didn't know that guy very well.
Mm-hmm.
How did he know about my Bruce thing? I refuse to believe he was given some kind of, you know, magical
maybe it was a popular thing that people thought Bruce was the devil.
Somebody has said something to him. I'm sure of it. Yeah. And it's about shame, and they can just target you with shame and make you feel like, wow, you know, you should be so ashamed already, didn't you know? So you try and catch up to get back to square one of not being so terribly bad for something you didn't even know was wrong. So, you know, I'm okay. I'm okay. I feel for all the people that have so many levels of shame from all of these, teachings, and that aren't in an environment. Some people live, incredibly conservative towns or families, and even free thought is not that much of a given. So, that's more my concern.
Because it's costly in that context even to fathom the idea of questioning something that is given, even questioning something as very basic and humane, like racism in some context is like, no, you're white and this is just how God wants. This is the God chosen race, and everything else is, so in some context, in some places here in the US, it's as that.
Oh, really? Still? Sorry.
Are you being sarcastic?
Well, no, from a religious thing, I was born in South Africa, and apartheid was justified through the Bible. Referring, there's a verse about, there will be hewers of wood and drawers of water, and it's, I think it's Cain and Abel or something like that. So it goes back there, and people say, well, that's the justification for why some people are not as equal as other people. Yeah.
I had never heard that.
Was the church teaching.
I never heard that particular justification. I know about slavery and whatnot.
Sure.
Just like they do with homosexuality and not. A question, Tanya. What was the first, if we are to visualize perhaps maybe dominoes falling over, what was the first domino that fell over at Hillsong for you that was like a trigger that you said, this seems a bit fishy?
So in my poster ripping, cassette destroying self, I do really remember being at church, and I was only 16 or 17, and the first kind of thread started unraveling, because I looked around, and it was kind of a tongues thing, and I remember it's not, I'm really not trying to be disrespectful, but standing there and somebody's, got their hands up, their eyes closed, and they're just saying ba 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 ba. And I thought that's not real. And then instantly you think, oh, the devil's in my head, Satan's in my head, I've got to get him out.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's not real. Come on, look at these people. That's not.
Again,
and so this war kind of begins. And so this war in your own mind. And that started when I was in kind of about 16. I'm just thinking by the 12th grade, it was like my head was falling apart. Because, I really just wanted to be like all of those people. They didn't seem to be looking around having questions. Why?
Like have a peace.
Yeah. And yet, the more you try and shut it off, the more it comes in and says, what about that over there? And that doesn't make sense. And I mean, for me, it's so interesting because now you can Google everything.
Yeah,
whereas I would have had to get my Bible and highlight something else, and then go to a pastor, and I would say, like, I don't get this bit, just doesn't match that bit.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd be like, "What? Why are you asking? What's the matter with you? Like, why do you have to ask these strange questions?" Which is, I makes it so interesting. Did you have
those moments? Did you have those moments?
Yeah, they just said, "Look, go to Bible college." You get a lot of those questions. So there's, the two approaches, which is, and they in particular, Hillsong, have always said to me, you're such a bright girl. Why can't you use your brain for something useful? But there's, I got two approaches, and one is, people try to answer the questions generally unsatisfactorily, or they just say, like, it's love, like it's God, like, why do you got to ask these questions? If someone loves you, they love you.
So those are one of the first few things you started questioning, and that can resonate with me a little bit. Those, the impartation of the Spirit. Like just believe it. There's so much emphasis on you, and maybe the whatever
Yeah,
the concentration you got to be in. It's kind of like you got to be into this trancing zone, and there's a bit of irony that plays into it, because they talk, and the narrative is Jesus did it all, but then there's all these things you got to do, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
so after you start kind of problematizing those things, or maybe like the gibberish speaking, they refer to as spiritual tongues. What was next, or when did you take that to a next step where it wasn't just maybe you theorizing, but then you probably spoke out, or maybe you came across something else that you were like, "No, this is that just makes it more concrete for me that I need to."
all right, yeah. I mean, I guess in that context as well, is if questions were allowed, or if you didn't have to accept the whole package, it might have been easier. But you
Mm,
expected to, just accept everything
yeah.
or nothing, or you're on the outer. So that's why it was difficult to kind of accept everything. I had I had a very sweet friend, and she was I talk about her in a little story in the book, and I she was dating a guy in our youth group. So now we're still only really at like 500 people, I guess. And um, during a breakup that they had, she disclosed to me that they'd been having sex. And what would happen was that I think there was like a youth group meeting on a Friday night. They would go to that like every weekend. And then they would have sex over the weekend. And then he would make them pray and like beg for forgiveness and pray for forgiveness. And then she would have to go take a morning after pill. And she was taking it so like,
Wow.
so regularly. And then by Sunday night, we're back in church lifting our hands, and everybody thinking he's a great guy. And I guess for me, soon after I left school, I got like into my first serious relationship, and it was seriously not a case of judgmental issues. It was like my own sanity. Um, if I knew what was going on there, and I couldn't kind of toe that line. So for me, it was just more like stepping away, um, because I couldn't stay sane while pretending to be something I wasn't. I mean, other people can. I'm not that good at it. I probably should have got better at it, and I would have got a bit further in life. But yeah. So at least I could kind of be sane to myself. Um, uh, so it wasn't this. People really want some kind of smoking gun, some kind of horror story, and bodies in the basement. But for me, leaving the church wasn't about that. It was just about trying to stay sane, basically, in light of all the hypocrisy and the contradictions, and eventually the corruption, and you know, finding out about the founders' crimes against children was 12, 13 years later.
And you were still attending Hillsong at this point?
No. I kind of left. I started the leaving process after I left high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a process because there was no explosion, no moment, no pool boy, like with Jerry Falwell. Have you been reading that?
Of
My
course, Jerry Falwell
goodness.
Jr. He's taking his dad's legacy to a whole new level.
Well, I mean, just as an aside, I feel really sorry for these kids. He didn't choose that life. And I'm not saying he's a great guy, but
No,
the next
there's a
generation really
story.
suffer. The next generation suffers so much. They just get expected to be to kind of have the same psychosis as their parents, basically.
When was the
So,
last time you stepped in Hillsong?
well, when I got arrested. So
But I guess before that, before we talk about that.
I guess I kind of, my earring, just lost my earring. So that process continued. I went to university. I had this relationship. I started going to university where they just did not take the Bible seriously at all. And nobody got struck by lightning. And that was incredibly shocking because Hillsong did then and continue to preach that without God, like as soon as your kids step outside of a church, they're just going to get hit by a truck, die of a drug overdose. It's church or drugs. And I was truly astounded to find out that wasn't the case. You got to, if we've got anyone still following, you got to remember there was no internet, there was no Google, there was nothing. All I knew is that if you stepped outside of God's protection, which was Hillsong, you were just fair game for anyone. So I'm sorry, I've gone on the tangent again.
No, you're good. So you went to university, and you're thinking about the last time maybe you were.
The last time?
Way before you got arrested, but that you're still in and out, not quite left. You were talking about how it was a process. So when was that maybe last?
I would have been about 21. I went for a kind of visit, and it just wasn't. I wasn't connecting. I was in a lot of distress for a lot of years because I did not believe these things intellectually. And yet I'd been brought up that you have to believe these things.
So you were trying to believe these things.
It's very difficult to so I just kind of figured I'd just have to put it aside. And like I said, it's not about being righteous, but not being a hypocrite, just to keep my sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And see what developed. But you can't make people believe things.
And they can only pretend so much.
Oh, yeah, you can't. So I guess the last time before that, I also would when I started researching for the book in 2005, I went to a few events, and eventually they kind of said to me, you're not welcome here. And they ended up actually physically throwing me out. But I had gone back into the research with quite an open mind, hoping that I could figure out what had happened and where I'd gone wrong, because there were still the people from youth group, still there 12, 13 years later, and they seemed happy. They hadn't had these crises of faith, and but it was such utter garbage that was coming out of these pastors' mouths. I would look around at these events
to
is
see
this
if you
real?
yeah.
Is Scan a Camera coming soon? Seriously, absolute, just garbage. So that then fell down very quickly. For me, I didn't have any great issues with not believing it, because it was just really badly thrown together bumper sticker kind of stuff.
When you're referencing that they physically removed you, this is the very last time you want to make an extension to your book, or this is when you're just about to release the book from scratch?
No, sorry, I think it was so I went to a women's conference in March of 2005, and then somebody put in a complaint. I had contacted them stupidly, I guess. Well, honestly.
That you wanted to do research.
Wanted to have an interview, and I didn't realize that they had spies in their congregation and stuff, and so they didn't. They sent me a "you're not welcome" letter after I'd been to a couple of events. They said basically, please, we're not going to give you an interview. Please refrain from attending our venues. And I thought, huh? they're joking, right? They've got to be kidding. It's a church, right? They didn't, it's like I grew up with them. It's my church. And so I ended up going back for Joyce Meyer was supposed to turn up. So I thought I'll go and watch that. And I went with a couple of friends, and we literally were sitting just quietly and got told, like, you're not supposed to be here. And
Oh, wow.
and it was I got spoken to by a guy who had married one of my friend's sisters at youth group. So I was like, all right, but we'll go have a talk. But I thought I was super clever, and I left my bag inside and went with him outside to talk. And so I said, like, I got to just go back and grab my bag. And that's when they sent security and like lifted me up and carried me out. So there was no conflict. There were no issues. Like but they were serious. They
wanted nothing to do with any possibility of any bad.
Then I realized, and with seriously going back 2005, they were still at, I don't know, say like 15,000 people worldwide congregation. I don't know, like I'm guessing, but they weren't.
2005, that's when I was there.
Yeah, okay. So, they were big, but they weren't enormous worldwide. And
they were starting to get renown.
You wouldn't have kind of figured they'd be that onto security that quick, but I guess.
Well, I guess maybe internally, like with talking about like and then you said you went to the conference.
Yeah, the women's conference. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they got plenty of. They got a circuit that is quite vigilante and spotting out stuff. So if someone saw you, they quickly reported you, and then they went into action mode.
Yeah, it's a fascinating system, and I'm guessing they would have the finest of technology now with facial recognition stuff. And who's giving, who's tithing what and when, and
when you go 2005, you're trying to piece out maybe last bits of your book. What was when you release your book? What is that like? Like what feedback did you get? Did you both ends?
Well, I mean, again, I'm very fortunate because the Australian media has always been very suspicious. If I had put out a book on how wonderful Hillsong was, I would be all over the United States with it. Because you guys, the Americans are a lot more, Christian focused and stuff. Australians are traditionally skeptical and, so the feedback was very, very good. It definitely started some conversations that people hadn't had before. They wanted to know who these people were. And, there was, and I guess it was my hope because for so long, I didn't know if there were other people out there like me. So we didn't have all this, and we didn't have all these forums and meetings and connections. And I figured, law of averages, there probably should be, maybe could be. So it was great to find out that there were other people that wanted to have these conversations. And for me, it's not about converting anybody or telling you that anything's horribly bad, but there was no other alternative. There was no other information. It was their side of the story, which is they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And there was nothing to counter that, or for anybody who might have not found the experience 100% great. And that's all I wanted to really do. There's some very harmful things I hear about, but yeah.
And I think that's how I came across your book. I think I came across your book in that search. In the Google's already alive there, but in that search, I was just trying to find some sort of page, website beyond the typical, they're worshiping the devil, because you find those. Their music is rock and roll, and I that's not where I'm going. That's just absurd. I wanted to find legitimate experiences of people that were problematizing some of the things that I, for example, saw that I found to be very cultish.
Yeah. Yeah. You saw these things too, yeah?
Oh, it's phenomenally obvious. It's phenomenally. I mean, now I can say it's phenomenally obvious.
Yeah.
But when I
Yeah.
was there, I would notice like the fact that like in cell group, for example, an experience I had in a cell group, and remember, I was matriculated as a student in the international college, so I'm kind of like part of the church and also part of the school because you got to do volunteering hours, which is another word for free labor.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so, and there's hundreds of kids doing free labor for the church and all in mass as volunteering. And I was in a cell group meeting and I was at my friend's house. It was the cell group meeting was at his house. He was from Ecuador. So his family's all Latina and everything. And they would attend church. So I had a beer at their house. I had a beer, house, no issue. Next thing I know is like I think it's like following day or following 2 days, I'm being called into the principal's office or the equivalent of the principal. I think it was Lee Burns back then. And that someone informed him that I had consumed alcoholic beverages. And I'm thinking, who the hell? Like,
Was
who
that,
the
I mean,
hell would?
was that on your paperwork though, that you were supposed to be alcohol
Yeah,
free?
yeah, 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 yeah. They had legitimate reasons to
Okay.
to score. But my questioning was, like, we're here amongst friends. Like, who
Uh-huh.
would have the need
Uh-huh.
to say that one beer, no one was put into any sort of danger. I wasn't driving. There was no pragmatic reason for putting it other than, oh, there's a rule there. We gotta like obey it. And there's a rule, there's an internal rule that I need to tattle on this person. And then that definitely caused suspicions within me. That one, I couldn't trust anyone.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Yeah.
couldn't trust anyone. And also the unraveling effect that took place, after
See,
that.
it's interesting because if I was such a committed Christian and you were doing that in front of me, I would feel that I had a responsibility to report you because you're introducing sin into our circle. I have to,
Mm.
I can always see the other sides of things and
Mm.
how that all
The
works.
explanation.
It's when you're so, because as time has gone on, it's become more and more apparent, and a mentor of mine said it to me when I was researching, it's the true believers that really kind of suffer because, the more kind of genuine and committed you were, it's like, a much bigger shock when you find out it's a house of cards. But yeah,
Precisely.
I might have well been that person to be like, I
Yeah,
need to help him. He's drinking. He doesn't know what he's doing.
you would have
Oh
tattled on me.
no. I don't know. Get help. We've got to get him help. I would have tattled to somebody else
For the
and said,
spirit.
what do we do with this guy? The youth leader, what do we do? He's like being attacked by the devil. He's
Yeah.
trying to make him drink alcohol.
Yeah. You mentioned it that way, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Like they were legitimately, but obviously now in hindsight, I just totally dislike, and to not use the word hate, when people are not up front.
Of course. It's
When people
all
are not up
deceptive.
front.
Of course.
But I've experienced that also here in the school I was working at. When they call me into HR and they tell me these things that no one ever told me to my face.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
There's a complaint about you, but we got to protect their anonymity. Yeah, I understand.
yeah. And that's the disguise they use. That's the disguise they use. Anonymity.
Like a whole lot of trouble has been made, but we're not going to tell you how. You've just got to deal with the consequences, not the kind of how it happened thing.
I throw the rock and I hide my hand. That's what that is saying we have in Puerto Rico. We throw the rock and I hide my hand.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's people kind of like, telling on you, and they're like, in the perspective is we're just passing the law. We're just passing justice. We're doing the right thing. Even if it comes so evident that the law in and of itself, or the application of the law in and of itself, defeats the very intention, the very initial purpose for that law. And that's when you see it happen. You see it here happening with policing and all that kind of stuff. you know how there's no de-escalation in things, and then you're like, well, especially within the black community, a person's dead because of a very basic thing, and they didn't know how to de-escalate
Yeah.
the situation. So a bit of a
Yeah.
tangent there, but in that realm, like and I had my own vulnerabilities too. I wasn't home.
Yeah.
I was in a different country. So that affected me in many ways. There was another experience I had at Hillsong that I at the time I didn't think much of it, but that's when I started getting into trouble. I was assigned a counselor.
Oh man.
His name was John. His
Wow.
name was John Ollis. He was an older guy. He was probably
Okay.
in his 70s. The very first thing, I'm not joking, Tanya. The very first thing he asked me after he does all the platitudical introduction, "Hey, how you doing? My name is da, da, da. Do you masturbate?
Oh my God.
Do you masturbate?
This is
Like
15 years ago. This is not like
this is 2000.
1952.
This is
Wow.
2005, and I'm
Okay.
like I get in trouble for drinking beer. Maybe there's some grades I had trouble with, and the very first thing he asked me is if I masturbate.
I think it's because they go and write it down somewhere. I have heard this, that they will, just like the Scientologists, kind of use that stuff. How do you respond to that kind of a question
And
anyways?
I'm like, I'm in my early 20s, and then I'm also
Right.
under the conviction that masturbation is a sin. You associate with porn, and I'm like feeling convicted. I'm like, oh, maybe this is the moment where I'm gonna have some internal healing, and I'm like, as a matter of fact, probably like 99% of the other me's around here, yes, I do. And it's like it's okay, we'll work through it. And then comes that condescending, merciful, here I am for you, buddy. Now that I've destroyed you, I'm going to build you back up.
Wow. Yes. So interesting that you say that. Yeah, that's definitely a pattern. Um, I'd love to think, and I can't say right now, but I'm friends with a couple of ex-Bible college students, and they've reported a lot of like just trauma, basically. There's a young woman, who was made to work. They make you work really hard. Love to hear more about what you went through. I mean, she she had to volunteer while she had a fever and um, was about to physically drop. And they said to her, "You just got to keep going." So it really is exploitation of labor, really, isn't it? I mean, except that you're paying them to go to the college, right? I mean,
It's beautified. It's beautified. And when I say that, the it's a privilege to
yeah,
be at Hillsong.
right.
It's a privilege to be at this place that has attained such reputation. That it has such a testimony that that God has placed it in this like a city on a hill. So when you go there, coming from whatever country you're coming from, it is a privilege. You're not going to be problematizing that. You're serving. And I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm not trying to be. It is You're serving God, and it's such a privilege. It's such a privilege to be there and wear those orange shirts that they would wear when they're serving,
Yeah,
and do the charity they do, which have now looking back on it, and just charity in general, I think is such a horrid thing because it's such a way to legitimize and perpetuate systemic problems and systemic issues, because you pretend you're actually doing something about it, but you're not getting to the bottom of it. Because there's a quote that says, I gave them food and they called me a saint. I questioned the system that made them poor and they called me a communist. So when you start problematizing things, it's gonna have deep consequences. But when you pretend you're caring and you're giving help, you're handing out sandwiches, you're going out to these groups, and then you give them a little invite to church, that's all thumbs up. But when you start asking questions like, oh, well, why is that person not earning a livable wage? Why is that person in this condition? Why is there so many black people in this area? And then white people. And you start asking those questions, then that represents trouble.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And as soon as you realize that asking questions is um, a problem, it's a time to get out early on. I mean, the same, the same patterns are just so obvious now, in terms of people just wanting to control other people. And they don't care what damage is done. And that's the issue. So, the people that I've spoken to who've been through Bible college, it took them years to recover from the damage that was done, physically, mentally. It's no coincidence that they recruit so many people from the, other parts of the world, so that you are on unsafe territory, unfamiliar. There's a woman I'm sure would love to speak to you. When they throw you out, they throw you out of something. You got visa issues, you got accommodation issues. It's not just.
Yeah, it's many things. It isn't just
and they
you're out
know
of
this.
the campus.
They know this.
It's. I mean, there's.
A friend of mine does quite a lot of. She watches a lot of Hillsong, right? She watches a lot of this stuff. She has left, and I'm like, I don't know how you do this, but she watches a lot of it. And she was watching them last July for their conference. And she said she was watching a thing they do where they go Hillsong backstage. And she said they've spent the whole conference advertising the Bible college, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because their international conference is going to have an international audience.
Yeah.
But it made me realize that I guess their events are all just different marketing exercises. There's women's, there's men's, there's kids. And then the Bible college thing, because obviously there's huge tax, havens for them with education and on. But it's like 90% of people are not from Australia, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are from outside. A lot of them are from the U.S.
And it's got to be deliberate, just to shape people up a bit. So,
and I think maybe local people are maybe more suspicious.
We've seen them, yeah, of course, yeah.
It's more suspicious than people outside, and also because outside you're geographically further. I mean, we're talking about a more globalized time. You have the internet, of course, is a bit harder than maybe back then, maybe when they first started, to keep secrets. But we have to be frank that the general census in this type of ambient is that you really don't question things. So within the Christian evangelical realm, questioning things is a sign of weakness, is a sign of you're kind of batting for the wrong team. So
that you even got questions at all.
So I don't see people that want to go there as people that are really bound to question many things. You know what I'm saying? So
that makes a lot of sense.
So they're going to be already pre-inclined, but I feel now they got to do a much better job at marketing themselves, because the internet is more accessible. Things are more accessible. So I think, and also I think maybe they've probably gotten better. Some things have gotten better at a forceful rate, because of all these things coming out. Maybe I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, but I remember the lady in charge of the TV and media department, which I was in. I was doing the TV and media certificate, whatever it was called. There were times that she would find herself, I would find herself guilt tripping the crew into, not only because you would have a minimum amount of time that you would volunteer, and that's it. That's what you're required in college. And kind of creating this narrative, if you can do more, it's spiritualizing that to make you feel like you're just doing the very basic, which is a lot already, to make you feel like you're not doing enough. And that would be a bit of a rhetoric that would be played into it. And I can only speak about her. I can't speak about other leaders that were doing that. But then now looking back on it, you realize how unprepared some of these people were. And some of them were just church members that had maybe some preparation, but they were not pedagogues. They didn't have any teaching degrees. I mean, now I tell these stories and I think about it. I had not re-traveled to these experiences in a
I
long
know
time.
I'm thinking while I'm talking to you of, a story I got told about a youth leader who took out the youth group because, the wilder, crazier things that you do, the greater fun time you got with God. I don't know. But, maybe 10 years ago this happened, and, the masculinity, the gender thing is really strong. Like you're a real man or you're a proper girl. And
In men's
so
group.
there, the competition is there. And like you're saying, people aren't really trained or prepared to do these things. And I'm told there was a youth group that went out and the leader might have been 20 years old, and everybody went and jumped off like this cliff into the ocean, except the leader didn't come back out of the water. Because they're not prepared. And, bad things happen to people. These are not benign organizations. Just because they say a bunch of things,
Yeah.
just because some people say we love you doesn't mean anything. And
Yeah.
it's so sad that, that they're filling such a huge gap that isn't being filled with community and villages,
with healthier things, with healthier
Yeah.
options, with more honest spaces where people can find themselves, can doubt, because there are Christian spaces that are that.
Yeah.
I have many friends that are part of Christian communities that are more communities than just social or country clubs, and that are actually embracing the process, the relative process of each individual, and they don't need to colonize spirituality. And that's another thing. I mean, after I leave Hillsong, and I see how more international they become with the campuses they start opening up, churches they start opening up in big metropolises like Paris, London, New York, LA. I feel like there is such a I find similarities between, maybe, I don't want to sound too harsh, but I mean similarities between the crown of Spain back in the 15th century and a colonial agenda.
I don't see how it's any different. They're the same dynamics, are they not? It's predatory, it's exploitative. And when you can do something in the name of God, you can do anything, justify anything.
Yes, because I mean, who are you to question God?
And also, there'll be forgiveness as well. If I get this wrong, I was doing God's will.
That too. That too.
But I must say, I find it quite interesting how well trained we were when you were talking about narratives and rhetoric as well. I'm good friends with a girl I went to youth group with, and she ended up marrying the youth pastor. And I just assumed she was a better person than me because she'd been chosen by God to marry him. He'd been chosen by God. And it's, it's all these things that you don't consciously realize until you kind of go, hang on.
It's toxic. It's toxic.
It's so limiting, and I've been so wrong so much of the time. It's just like my great life lesson is I'm like constantly wrong, but things that I didn't think should be that traumatic for people, I guess, like I talked about in the pandemic at the beginning, but are really traumatic for people. I underestimated the effect that these churches have on gay and lesbian people. I kind of just thought, okay, well, if it's not, walk out the door and go and have your other life, and don't let them upset you. But, countless conversations with people where they literally get to a point of either I leave this church or I kill myself. And, I hear horror stories from the Bible college of people grappling with their sexuality and running to Bible college to try and hide it. And, we don't realize the magnitude of the impact. This is not, I've never been about church bashing. I'm about, trying to save or contribute to helping people's sanity and suicidality, because when you get told that you are just originally sinful and just a bucket of shame and you're wrong, and they keep moving, the bar up and up, you can never really quite get.
It's unattainable.
it has very real effects in the outside world. How long did it take you to kind of shake it off, as Taylor says?
Well, I think I've always been a problematizer.
Yeah.
Ever since I was in kindergarten, my parents tell me that the teacher called them up because I wasn't doing my capital A's. There was the little dotted line in between the to get the capital A's to the top, and
Yeah.
then the small caps to the dotted line. And I was doing my capital A's all the way only into the dotted line, and I would not do it all the way to the top. And she's like, "Oh, the little Indian needs to get into the tippy. He's not gonna be able to get into the tippy." So she cited my parents over. So she's telling my parents about the story about the little Indian getting into the tippy. He can't get into the tippy because I'm only making the tippy all the way to the dotted line. So
Oh, how cute.
I tell my dad, Dad, teacher's so stupid. The little Indian can crawl down and get inside the tippy. Problematizing since I was 5.
Or
But
or recreating.
when I leave Australia, I mean, I leave Australia with heaps of trauma. I was in a
Okay.
toxic relationship, mutually toxic, mutually hurtful. So I leave quite wounded. Luckily, I leave with a New Rican friend I met, a girl born in New York but from Puerto Rican heritage. We clicked. She became my sister. So I mean, I had that fortune. I got to leave with her, and I go to New York. So when I go to New York, I go there because I want to go be part of this church that meets in a bar led by Jay Baker. I don't know if you ever heard of Jay Baker, son of Jim and Tommy Faye Baker.
Oh, okay. How's he doing?
He's doing well. He's a good friend of mine. He's actually been here, and
Oh,
I go to this place where he's problematizing all these things. He's problematizing the LGBTQ issue. He becomes a gay affirming pastor. So he's doing all these things that I start problematizing as I'm in Hillsong. So that's why I was suspicious to a lot of things. But as I leave, I don't think I had a full notion of how affected I was. I think many people don't, because you embrace things as normal as
right.
you
And
just
like we've
go
been
on.
saying, like it's not with the subliminal. It's it's very subtle. It's very there's a lot of assumed understanding. Um, and yeah, uh, it's just I still see things coming up on Facebook in ex-Christian groups. There's still people battling all of this stuff, and is it me? Is it my family? That kind of stuff. So it's not historical. It's still current. These
Yeah, it's not
huge
hysterical.
trauma
I don't
producing
know.
places. And one day, I wonder if um, some of what is made into sin is seen it through a criminal lens, like so much the terms, dating in these places, um, exploitation by leaders, and um, I mean, sorry, I'm just going off on a tangent, and I cannot remember the church, but where a young woman has brought a case against a youth pastor from old of, not driving her home and driving her down the dirt track and
Oh wow.
assaulting her. And then, they both prayed about it and repented. Um, whereas if you see that in a direct criminal perspective, it's just an assault. And I
Yeah.
just wonder if one day, everybody started seeing these things through that different lens, how much change that could bring about.
You bring a
Because it's
really good point. You bring a super good
everywhere.
point.
Oh man, it's called church up, times up for church. I forget. Sorry, the hashtag. I need one more coffee.
That
But you
that
know what I
is
mean?
that
It's
is
part
that.
of that Me Too thing,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
and it's the church Me Too and church too, and is a hashtag. But yeah, if all of these people that have been exploited didn't see themselves as sinful, but saw themselves as victims of crime. Oh,
Plenty of these
yeah,
things would rise up more to the surface. Yeah, of
yeah,
course. And the urgency that there is to allow these people to know that it isn't them.
Yeah.
It isn't them. It isn't a problem with them. It isn't the mini skirt you put on. It isn't the way that you didn't follow the proper discipleship or
Yeah.
the proper course. And I think that serves such an urgency because it is off. Like, I mean, without these things added onto the journey of our lives, we have traumas. We're going to have traumas. So imagine adding this whole layer of extra complex traumas to the already traumatic life that we live because
Yeah.
of capitalism
Yeah.
and everything.
Yeah.
It is not, we're not designed to go through these experiences.
Yeah. No. And I'm saying it even, reproduced again. Like I'm saying to you, like the conspiracy theorists, the QAnon people, like it's just people must have a need to for revolution. It's exciting, and it gives people hope. And it is very upsetting. I think we really do need to mention how many wonderful people are out there, particularly the anonymous people of the mega churches, the people who are packaging the hampers for Christmas that Hillsong don't pay for. I mean, I've seen this enough times now that I can tell you that Hillsong does not spend a dime on any community work, and they live off the volunteers and the donations. So if we're giving out Christmas hampers, somebody donated that food, somebody else packaged it, and somebody else is dropping it off, and they've got their stamp on it. And people think that by being involved in something like that, that they're helping the community, that they're kind of helping Hillsong's brand. So there's, a lot of great people in there, and I don't want to be condescending and say that they're being exploited, but there's a lot of exploitation going on.
They are. It's not a commentary on them. It's a commentary on the institution that is using them.
People with, wonderful, wonderful intentions. You're incredibly generous and kind and giving. And
yeah, of course. And I don't like I said, I don't like painting things with one brushstroke. There's cases. And also, when there's harsh criticism, I point that harsh criticism to the leadership. To those people in charge, to those people creating those conditions, perpetuating those conditions. And there's so much condescendence that plays out too, because people say, well, Brian Houston's an us guy. I don't have a beef with Brian Houston.
Yeah.
I don't have a beef with him, but it is the system that he's perpetuating. It is a system that all these leaders are perpetuating, and they're reaping a huge benefit from.
Of course they are. And I mean, it's really just... I think I've settled on the product that they're selling is reassurance. So you go there and you buy some reassurance that you've been to church and that you're okay and that, you're in the church. You got nothing to show for it. And, I guess the concerns, you can leave a Bible college, and if you're healthy enough, you can survive that. If they haven't diminished you to the point where, there's really bad stuff coming out of Bible colleges, really damaging stuff.
We were talking about Jerry Falwell Jr. Just a year earlier, and Jerry Falwell Jr. is the president of a Bible college, of a mainstream university, not just Bible college.
And I don't know. It might be like I feel sorry for the guy. Can you imagine being Jerry Falwell's kid?
I know,
and you're not even called like Jack. Do you know what I mean? Everybody
hurt more people, but there's people that are being extremely hurt by him and by his leadership. So that's tragic. But I feel you, of course. Hurt more people. So that's why the pattern needs to stop.
The insanity that these kids are brought up in, and it's like a shared psychosis. But then, again, these things have very serious consequences when something serious happens. So, if a child gets hurt, or if somebody is, and then just this entire process of silence and shame, and the problem is with you, that has some very real outcomes. It's, and those are important things to keep talking about.
can I ask you? So post you're alive post Hillsong. What can you what can you share about the redemption that you found post Hillsong, or the healing that you found post Hillsong, or as you are, I believe now a confessed atheist or agnostic atheist. I don't know if see no maybe.
Oh, look, yes, but then I've kind of evolved as well because I'm not the bearer of all truth. I don't know all the true things.
Wonderful.
10, yeah, like 10 years ago, the way people were thinking, the new way of thinking was like, this doesn't make sense. It's not true. You don't have to believe it. And then as time has gone on, and I've had contact with such wonderfully beautiful people, kind people, Christian people. I've had a lot of hideous people, but I've had I think it's very stupid of me to, claim, like I say, claim to hold any kind of truth. I think it's very disrespectful of me not to appreciate other people's perspectives. And I've been looking recently. It might sound really mainstream, but I ended up watching Jordan Peterson's analysis of the Bible. He does these like really long lectures, and I've done a few of them. And he talks about universal wisdoms and all those kinds of things. So I'm not as arrogant and black and white as I was 10 years ago, to be honest with you.
How would you describe your current place right now, if you had to choose a word? I mean, not to overly depend on labels, but the
Yeah,
current pilgrimage you're in.
I wouldn't say I'm any kind of more progressed than I used to be. But I'm not as kind of anti. I'm quite clear about what we need to be anti.
Hmm.
Structures and institutions and oppressive systems. But there's no point in ridiculing anybody for anything
Oh,
that is close to their
entirely. No,
heart.
no, entirely. Like I mean, being an
Whereas
atheist or an
I thought that
agnostic,
was justifiable, but
of
it's
course,
not.
like being an atheist or agnostic doesn't equate to that. Being you can be an arrogant asshole agnostic, an arrogant asshole atheist, an arrogant asshole Buddhist, arrogant asshole Christian. So those are not prerequisites to being whatever. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you find yourself within more of an agnostic point of view, or like spiritualist?
I'm so like fundamentalist black and white. I still don't see how this all makes sense. But I like Neil deGrasse Tyson when he says that like we're all part of the universe and the universe is all part of us and it's so exciting. We're all just atoms together. And so,
Hmm.
I'll do a little meditation.
Hmm.
Do a little meditation and listen to something on Spotify, and I don't,
Get your Zen on,
yeah. I mean, I
of
didn't,
course.
it's all very pleasant, but no, yeah. I mean, once you've kind of been through all of that extremity, you kind of can't do it again. Well, I can't. Some people spend their whole lives moving from ism to like feminism and veganism and but yeah, I kind of did that.
And that's
So just go back to Bruce, really.
that's journey.
I mean, Bruce is again,
You're,
and Bruce Springsteen has played upon this. He has
yes,
acted like an
yes,
evangelist. He knows the effect he has on people.
yes,
Um,
yes. Bruce is
so
Bruce.
I'm definitely seen to be attracted to like cult leaders, big kind of celebrity and stuff. I'm amused
Like a hobby.
like a unconscious kind of habit. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been trained to do that. I'm amused. I watched a series of videos by a guy called James Jarney. I'll send you the YouTube
Sure,
a bit
please do.
later, on the toxicity of self-help movement, on the rise of fake gurus. And this guy has done some really intense work on how, and again, it's that same system. You market something, you tell people they can be better, and I've got the answer for you, and all you need to do is just pay this little amount of money, and you're like, your whole life's going to be better. But it's up to you. It's up to you to do the work. So if it doesn't work out, it's your fault.
Not
You
me.
didn't apply.
No.
And it makes me smile because I watch these videos and I was like, wow, this guy has figured out what took me 12 years to like come to peace with. He's 20 years old. He's 20 years old.
Ahead of the game.
And it's, you know, it's great. It's so good.
You know who I tune into sometimes has brought me a lot of learning and unlearning experiences is Russell Brand.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh.
He does beautiful things.
He's okay? I find him a little annoying. Do you know what I mean? And he dumped Katy Perry by text message. Did you know that?
But what reference point are you using? Like Russell Brand, like ages ago, or actor comedian Russell Brand? Because he's into this more mindfulness mode. He does these videos, and he has a pocket of his own. And he wrote this book called Recovery, based on a 12-step program that helped him, but how he enlarged it to be applicable to everyone, how we all have our addictions and stuff. And that book changed my life.
Okay.
Changed my life. And he seems just very legitimate. He seems very legitimate, very genuine. And he is into spiritualities, but definitely not much into institutionalized spirituality or institutionalized religion. So yeah, he has some interesting things going on.
But isn't this the beauty of it? Because you're allowed to take a little bit of Russell Brand that you like and not take all of it. And he doesn't actually have to be perfect.
Yeah, I don't need an idol.
You know, he does. He's allowed to have flaws, and you can still
deconstruct them and not. I don't have a house of cards that's gonna fall down on me.
What do you think is going to happen? Because there's going to be no heroes left if everybody's going to get canceled. I wonder what's going to happen next in the evolution of all that. You know,
but that's where people are. I think we're not meant to have idols or heroes as we have predefined them, or as Hollywood has taught us to predefine them. We just meant to be people all around, and we can admire things about us, and we're all full of contradictions. We're all full of heroic things. But I get your point. Like, but we can look up to each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's because of what we've been through, I guess, that we kind of got a head start on thinking of those things. But I mean, I really enjoyed Jordan Peterson. I watched for him for a couple of years on and off, and so I don't agree with everything he says. Some of the things he says I find just stupid, ignorant. Other things he has said have literally assisted me in my thinking so much that I can't imagine. Right. So, I really hope that this fundamentalism, this internet fundamentalism kind of changes soon, because
and you're talking about, like, for example, like the cancel culture that basically that's become a form of cyber policing that is not sustainable, and it does not allow for real transparent relationships to flourish and happen, to realize that we're all in journeying together. And it's not to hold people accountable. We there's some things that need to be you need to be prophetically calling out injustice, of course.
Sure.
But know people that are in some positions that those definitely need to be heated up and be prophetically denouncing. And then recognize the little pawns in the game. They're just little working ants. You don't need to roll over them.
Yeah. That's bullying on top of bullying on top of bullying. I just wonder if it's part of a natural progression of everybody finally having a voice. There's a beautiful article I'll send you from The Atlantic called The Culture of Shut Up. And it was written by one of Obama's speechwriters. And, he says, we finally have these tools. We finally have this opportunity for every single person to have a voice. And all we're saying is shut up. You shut up. You shut up. Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. And I think talking about stuff is so important. Sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. Let's bring stuff out. Talk about it. It's
no more dealing with stuff and behind closed doors. Because that's how they deal with these things, to keep the status quo.
So sick. It just and it's very sad. it's really, really sad, but there's so much hope now. People have so much more access, and there's so many different schools of thought. Atheism, I think, we needed the white men to go into the musty institutions and talk about those things to clear the way for everybody else to have more kind of conversations. So yeah, it was dominated by those guys for a while, but it had to be. Who else was going to kind of address those institutions? You know, and now we've just got access to so much stuff. So I still get kind of surprised that, like I was saying to you, you know, I had that highlighted Bible. I had to memorize my questions. Now I can just Google them. But the effect is still very strong on people. So
Do you feel that, for example, you know, you, after writing 2 books, after going through the experiences you've gone through, do you feel in a place right now where those things, for example, and I'm not talking about, like, you know, living in regret or whatnot, but do you feel that those things made you, like, stronger? And I don't mean to ask a stupid question,
sure.
but I mean to say, because I'm not here to suggest let's make a program to make people stronger and let's make them all go through those experiences, because
Yeah.
I don't think that's marketable. I don't think
It's
that's
how
good.
life goes,
But
right?
what value do you feel there is, in your own personal walk, with what you went through, with the what you went through in Hillsong, with being taken out, like with being shamed and taken out of a, of an activity, of an event? Like, what do you think those things did to you as a person? Um,
It's all been really good. Hey, like, so it leaves you with yourself, and you know, there's no hiding behind belief systems or like leaders or like some kind of gang or anything. You got to like get your own truth. You really, really, really do. You just have to. No one's going to give you the answers. You have to figure out your own stuff, and the resolution of that is really cool. It's really great. It is a kind of a problem for me because I can't take life as seriously as I probably should. 10 years of sleep, because you don't know if you're going to hell or not. You know, what somebody is wearing or what somebody thinks of you is not always that important in comparison. So, yeah, that's led to a few problems. But you know what I mean? How am I supposed to take my boss seriously when I've like, you know, be terrified of a boss when I've been like wrestling God?
yeah, I gotcha.
Right?
You
So I got to kind
face
of, you know,
heat.
that's a good and a bad thing. It's been helpful and a little bit of a problem, but yeah. And I mean, yeah, don't. There's no point in which I think life stops testing you. You know, we had some curveballs this week, and wow, I don't think anybody can say they've arrived. If they have, I'd be really interested.
To know that map.
You don't seem to get a choice. Life keeps going. Life keeps teaching. Life keeps
Yeah.
throwing things at you, and yeah. So you keep, you know, every time I think I've got it pretty figured out. I'm like, oh, really? You do? Cool. Try this. Boom.
Seems I didn't have it all figured out.
Yeah. Well, great. Let's go back to square one.
And I think it's good to have that approach to life, you know, that you realize that, actually, doubt is such a beautiful thing because it opens the realms up. You know, you don't need to have it all figured
Sure.
out. You don't need to, you know, it's like a palm tree. You know, I'm from Puerto Rico, and all the hurricanes we get, you know, you see the palm tree interact with a hurricane. It doesn't crack. It sways back and forth. But you know, but we're kind of told, like, you got to walk in a straight line, you got to stay
Yeah.
firm,
Get it right.
and it's counter human. We got to be flexible. Zigzagging is part of the way that we grow.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I have one last question, and this is the question I like to ask everyone that comes out here, and it's based off of a saying that is attributed to Eduardo Galeano. He's a Chilean, I believe, author, but he is not the quote her. He's not the. He's not. That's not his quote. He's wrongly attributed. But the point is a quote. It's a quote that has to do with utopia. Our utopias are points of references that keep us moving. You know, what is the point of this place in the horizon that we strive to walk towards? And you take 5 steps, and then utopia takes 5 more steps. You take 10 steps, and it takes 10 more steps, and you realize I'm not getting there. So what is the point of the utopia? You know, well, to keep on moving forward. To keep on moving forward. So I ask you, Tanya, what are your utopias that keep on referencing you as a guiding point to move forward in life, even as things become shitty or shittier? What things allow you to keep on moving forward?
You know, it does get very, very difficult at some points. I'm struck recently, and we're about to hit spring. I bought a cactus the other day from a dark, smoky tobacconist that was selling cactuses, and I grabbed one and I brought it home, and there's new growth. There's new growth. There's little buds coming out on these things, branches, and life goes on, whether you care or not, whether you're participating or not. Life goes on. Growth keeps happening. It keeps happening. Do you know what I mean? So there's our earth is like this giant organism, and I feel like it's getting all these outbreaks of problems, and it's, I don't know, but the same principles keep going. There's new growth every spring. You know, we had bushfires here in January, and it's a brutal world, but it's going to keep going according to things, and there is new growth and new life, and it's just going to keep going. So I find that is all a lot bigger than me, and I like that.
I like that metaphor. Tanya, gracias. Thank you. I
Thank
really
you. This is
appreciate
lovely.
this exchange, you know, and got to reminisce a little bit of nostalgic memories.
You mean get triggered? That's that's fine.
And no, but it's good to walk. It's good to walk through memories and walk by the metaphorical hand of another person who's gone through things that are similar, and talk about things and talk. I think talking is definitely healthy. Taking things
And
out,
you know, I'm constantly reminded how different we all are and how differently we see things, and I'm constantly surprised that we don't kind of collide a lot more often as humans. So, you know, it's also individual, and what matters to me is so irrelevant to somebody else, but might have been the defining moment. But that's why these conversations are so important to, you know, somebody was asking the other day on one of these ex-Christian sites, like, what do I do? What do I do? You know, what am I going to think? And it's like, well, take the leap of not faith, and, you know, your truth will come to you. Your truth comes to you. It can't help but come to you. So thank you for this opportunity to do some of the talking.
We need spaces that don't focus so much on triumphalism, and focus on losing sometimes, and focus on being on the ground, being real, and you know, and especially
so much healing in that.
Very necessary. So gracias everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much. Everyone who's going to tune in, perhaps when this is already recorded, thank you so much for tuning in.
Beautiful.
We will see each other next week in Tertuliando en Cuarentena, or Gathering in Quarantine. I like to close off with a fellow Puerto Rican astrologer who actually, there's a documentary on Netflix called Mucho, Mucho Amor. And every time he would finish his segments, he would finish off with this phrase: Espero que tengan mucha paz y mucho, mucho amor. So, people, see you around. Don't disconnect, Tanya. Much peace. Ciao, people.